Can you imagine if sports leagues operated in a way where there's no off-season announcements and you're left to wait months until the regular season to see what happens in the off-season? I saw this idea on social media the other day, and it was something that I found to be really interesting. Imagine you have to wait all off-season until you can see what free agents did, what decisions. Imagine Cooper Kupp randomly being on the Seahawks, Devontae Adams all of a sudden on the Rams, Deebo Samuel being traded to the Commanders. You wouldn't know any of this. Imagine Saquon from last season all of a sudden ending up on the division rival on the Eagles from the Giants. Those are all crazy things that I think it would be insanely funny to think about. I mean, the major depression that some fans would see and then the excitement that others. I mean, the 49ers lost half their team. Their division window might be done. But this is what I'm going to be talking about this episode. Just free agency. It's been about a week since free agency opened up, so I figured I'd give it some time. But my name is Zoe Lulinski. Welcome to another episode of the Don't Get Me Going podcast. Like I mentioned, I'm just going to be talking all things free agency. There's a lot to talk about, lots of big moves, lots of excitement for the rest of the offseason and going into this next season. Just seeing some of these contracts, it also made me just think about like how crazy it is, how much money is just passed around, even in other sports. I mean, NFL uses much less money, much smaller contracts than look at the NBA with basketball or these 10-year-long contracts in baseball that happen all the time. I think it's really interesting. I mean, in 2012, Peyton Manning signed a 5-year, $96 million deal, and that was considered record-breaking. That was considered absolutely insane. And now a guy like Sam Darnold, who's had one season, I think he still needs to prove himself, has a $100 million deal. That's only 3 years, so 2 years less, more money total with the Seahawks. That's just absolutely insane to me. And then looking at all these moves, I think some of the big news right now of players that are still available. Amari Cooper, it was mentioned he wants to stay on the West Coast, which I think is interesting. I don't think he's ever played on the West Coast other than with the Raiders at the beginning of his career. He's been on the East Coast other than that, so I don't know fully what he means by that, but I mean, it's understandable. West Coast is nice weather. If you're there once, you're gonna want to stay there. But Chris Godwin, I thought his deal, he turned down a $30 million deal to stay with the Buccaneers. If that's the most loyalty I've seen. If that's not considered loyalty, if you don't respect that, that's pretty crazy to me. I respect that. I honestly, it's what I expect. I expect him to go back to the Buccaneers, turning down a deal. I mean, if you're an NFL player, you're earning millions of dollars no matter what. I don't think money should be the top. I mean, hey, I guess it's based. I mean, I don't think money is always the top option for these guys. And then looking into Aaron Rodgers, Vikings, Giants, and Steelers are the three options. And knowing him and knowing how much entertainment and media he likes to get, I think it'd be really funny to see him go to the Vikings. That might just be the top option for him just because of the talent as well. I mean, any quarterback's going to want to go to the Vikings. Sam Darnold, not to put him down, but he looked great with the Vikings, having Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, Aaron Jones. Those are just the first four guys that came to mind. They have a lot of weapons, solid offensive line, solid defense. That's why they were so good last year. I mean, any quarterback can succeed, and then that would be probably some of the best weapons Aaron Rodgers has had in his career. With Justin Jefferson, he's had some good duos, but I mean, that's a pretty stacked lineup, and I think any quarterback could succeed there, even if they decided to go to J.J. McCarthy as well. But just for pure entertainment purposes and his personality, I see him going to the Vikings over anyone. I think they're kind of an underdog in the conversation as well with the Giants and Steelers. It kind of almost seems like he's waiting to make his decision on where he goes based off what the Vikings decide to do. And then Myles Garrett's another topic. He recently signed a $40 million contract with the Browns, which that's a lot of money. And the Browns have been spending a lot of money. On just two players alone with Deshaun Watson and Myles Garrett, they're spending an insane amount of money on just those two players alone. And I don't think, I mean, great player, but when you're spending that much money on guys outside the quarterback position or just that money on one particular player in general, it kind of takes away from what you can do with the rest of the team. And then it's also been reported that he's been showing up late, just has not been doing everything that his job entails the last few weeks, and then they reward him with a $40 million contract. So, if that tells you anything, all you have to do is be good at sports and be good in the NFL, and you'll get paid. And then he also just claimed it wasn't about the money and that his heart is in the right place and that the fans will see that. I think it's interesting because he just signed a $40 million deal and did eagerly want to get out of the Browns organization like 2 weeks ago. But, I mean, you see it with a lot of players in the league with Javon Holland. He said something like the same type of thing. He wanted to go to a winning team, and then he ended up signing with the Giants. I don't think the Giants are going to be big contenders until they figure out the head coach and GM position. I think Brian Daboll still has some potential. They don't have a quarterback right now, though, so I think before anything, you got to figure that out. And then Justin Fields, I really like the Justin Fields pick. I'm going to get more into that later because I will be speaking about the biggest risks I think have been taken in free agency, the top winners, and my favorite free agency pickups. But before I get into that, I do also just want to mention the Packers losing out on Cooper Kupp and all of these other players that they've lost out on. They haven't made many moves other than overpaying for an offensive lineman. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the offensive lineman is that bad, but paying as much as they did, especially when Mekhi Becton signed a $10 million deal just yesterday. And I came across an interesting stat from a Packers Instagram account. They've only signed 2 wide receivers in their GM's era, which has lasted 8 years. It was Devin Funchess and Sammy Watkins, and their combined cap hit was $11.5 million total. So if that tells you anything, they're also not known for drafting receivers in the first round. So I think the receivers they even have is pretty impressive. They have a lot of solid depth, but I think they need another number one option. I think they were in play for Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp obviously decided to go to the Seahawks. He's from there, so from Washington. So that makes sense to me, but interesting to think about. Moving on to the top winners that I have. Number 1 is the Bears. Same could be said for the last 3 years for them. I think they've done really good in free agency, filling holes and upgrading where they need to. Not even including free agency, just to the start of the offseason in general. They get one of the hottest head coaches coming into the offseason in Ben Johnson, which is just great for the offense and the majority of the team. They got a really great coaching roster with him, and then just in free agency trading for Jonah Jackson and Joe Thuney right away, right before free agency. That fills in some holes in a time when, I mean, the offensive line is always a hot market, and they were able to get guys for slightly cheaper when everyone in free agency has gone for much higher than a team might want to pay for them. They've all been overpriced, which makes sense for offensive linemen, but I think Joe Thuney is he's a Hall of Fame lineman. Like, he's played for Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, the 2 GOATs of the league. And then not even that, they also get Drew Dahlman in free agency right to start. Within the first hour of free agency starting, they get a top 5 center in the league, and then they also signed Grady Jarrett and then another solid receiver for the number 3 role for them. I think they're doing great. It really opened up the draft for them, so obviously full offseason winners, who knows yet. We got to see what they do in free agents or in the draft once that comes around next month. And coming in at 2, I have the Vikings. Day 2, even day 1, they signed a lot of solid guys. They got Will Fries. They re-signed Aaron Jones at running back. Re-signed Byron Murphy. Got Jonathan Allen after he was cut by the Commanders. Javon Hargrave, Ryan Kelly, Isaiah Rodgers. They're also filling holes. They lost a lot of guys. They lost Stephon Gilmore. They lost a couple other defenders, but replacing that with Isaiah Rodgers and then getting Byron Murphy back is really solid. They've actually been underrated. Last year they had a pretty solid free agency as well. So Bears and Vikings know how to do it. The NFC North knows how to win in free agency and win the offseason, it appears so. And the Commanders, they have done really good in trading. They may not have been as active in free agency, but they traded for Laramie Tunzel, who's slightly older now. does get a lot of penalties, but overall he's a top offensive lineman in the league, and it's just upgrading the offense more and more for Jaden Daniels. Got Deebo Samuel as well, and then Javon Kinlaw. And I think Zach Ertz is also a really solid re-signed for them. He's a older veteran, solid. He's still solid. He produces well at tight end still. I think that was another really solid option for them. So those are the top 3 winners. But I also want to mention the Broncos. The Broncos recently, they really haven't done much, but what they have done, they've gotten Evan Ingram, who is, in my opinion, an underrated tight end. He was cut from the Jaguars, and the Broncos trying to help Bo Nix as much as possible, which is what you should do. And it's a common theme with all of these teams, actually. Vikings have a young quarterback they draft. All 4 of these teams that I've mentioned have a second-year quarterback coming in. Broncos have Bo Nix, Vikings have J.J. McCarthy, Commanders have Jaden Daniels, and Bears have Caleb Williams. All of them have invested in their rookie, no matter if the Vikings are going to go for a veteran for another year or 2. Either way, they're investing in that offense. Evan Ingram is second most in receptions for a tight end since 2022, and that's only behind Travis Kelce, so he's very underrated. He's a reliable option for a young quarterback. And then they also signed Dre Greenlaw. He's one of my, honestly, Dre Greenlaw and Evan Ingram are 2 of my favorite pickups of free agency in general. Dre Greenlaw, after he tore his Achilles, of course, that's a hard injury to come back from, but they were able to sign him for a somewhat cheaper deal, and he's looked good since coming back. He only played a couple games, but in those games he did look like himself, and when he's at his max potential, he is one of the top players at his position. So I really liked those 4 the 4 teams for top winners. And the biggest risks in free agency, of course, I think number 1 is Sam Darnold. We saw one good year from him, but that was in an offense with run by Kevin O'Connell and then some of the top weapons you could have. But the Seahawks are not shy of giving him some weapons. They got Kenneth Walker still at running back. They have a somewhat decent O-line, and then they just signed Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp is obviously a really solid option for him if he stays healthy. So, and then they also got JSN still. They did obviously trade DK and cut Tyler Lockett, but the Seahawks still have some guys, and I think that if Sam Darnold is the quarterback that he appears to be, he will be fine, and he'll be fine on the Seahawks. But 3 years for $100 million, I think, is quite a lot of money to spend on him. $55 million guaranteed. So, and then heading into the next biggest risk, I'd say, is the Texans trading so much of their offensive line. They did trade for a guy, but they traded Tunzel, got rid of another guy. I'm blanking on his name at the moment, but they got rid of a couple pieces of their offensive line, which is, I think, their weakest part of the team in general. The offense struggled last year, especially with all the injuries on the wide receiver side of the ball, or the wide receiver position. But overall, I think it's pretty risky getting rid of all these linemen, especially when you should be trying to get more linemen for C.J. Stroud. So I'm curious to see how that goes. And then the Panthers made J.C. Horn the highest paid cornerback in the league. And that, not to say he's not good, but there's other guys like Jalen Johnson, Sauce Gardner, Patrick Surtain, who just won Defensive Player of the Year, and Stingley, who are all, in my opinion, better than him, and paying him that much money is definitely going to take away from other things they could do. But they're solid in cap space. They should be okay. But I think that is something that you could look at as being somewhat risky. Devontae Adams is another risky option. I wouldn't say he's fully injury-free. He's not as injury-prone as Cooper Kupp, but he's older. The Rams cutting Cooper Kupp just to sign a guy who's older than Devontae Adams. I think at this moment you could say he's better, but I don't see the Rams. They signed him to a 1-year, $20 million deal. I don't see the Rams competing for the Super Bowl right now, so that signing just didn't really make much sense to me. My favorite signing is Justin Fields to the Jets, like $20 million a year, 2 years, $40 million deal, I think, if I'm thinking correctly. But I really like that signing. He was really good with the Bears. He showed some promise with the Steelers last year. One of the top runners in the league. He's as good as Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels. I think Justin Fields, most of his highlights that you see are with his legs, and I think Last year he did show some more promise with the passing game, and I think he's, while inconsistent, has a pretty solid deep ball overall. He gets along well with his teammates. Josh Myers just signed with them as well. I really like the signing, and I think he has a lot of potential still. And Drew Dahlman, I think it was a great signing for the Bears. That was the one guy that I think the Bears needed to get, and they got him right away for a somewhat cheaper deal than what some of the other offensive linemen were getting, and he's a top 5 center in the league. Dre Greenlaw is the third favorite signing, and I've mentioned this. Dre Greenlaw and Evan Ingram are two of my favorite signings. Greenlaw signed for not cheap, but definitely less expensive than some of the other guys that I think are the same caliber as him. And then Evan Ingram is a great weapon to add for Bo Nix. And then for the Patriots were big spenders. They came into free agency with the most cap space, and Milton Williams is a pretty young player, and I think one of the top top players in free agency in general this year. And Milton Williams to sign to the defensive line for the Patriots is definitely a big addition for that defense. For the remaining free agents, you got Asante Samuel, Aaron Rodgers. If Aaron Rodgers does sign to the Steelers, I just want to say him with George Pickens and DK Metcalf at wide receiver, I want to know what goes on in Mike Tomlin's brain if that gets announced, because those are 3 major big name players that have a lot on their mind and are very big thinkers, if you want to call it that. So I'd be really curious to see how that ends up playing midway through the year. Cam Robinson is another solid option at offensive tackle. I think any team that picks him up, I think that's a solid addition. Yeah. And then Stephon Diggs. I think Stephon Diggs will be going back to the Texans. If I looked at it now, the Texans did sign a couple receivers, a trio of receivers: Justin Watson, Braxton Berrios, and Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk's an underrated option. I don't think he was used very much or in the right way with the Jaguars last year, and he's definitely a solid option for CJ Stroud. But just for more depth, the Texans have struggled with injuries. So getting Stephon Diggs back for even a year or two would be solid. And then another quarterback option, Russell Wilson. I don't know if I see him fully getting a starting job next year, but he can definitely compete for one, be a mentor for a player, something like that. And then Tevin Jenkins is another solid offensive line option. He's a really good option to rotate. You could rotate him to tackle, you can rotate him to guard. The only problem with him is that he's pretty injury prone, but when he's on the field, he's a pretty solid option on the offensive line. Another option, J.K. Dobbins is one of the top running backs still available in free agency. Getting 2 years out of that ACL tear for him as well, I think he's only going to get stronger. And yes, he also does have some injuries, but if you pair him with a running back, I think lowering his workload, and also lowering his workload, he's another great option. That's it for me today, though. I'm going to continue to keep an eye out for free agency moves, things like that. Super excited to see where the rest of this offseason goes. Don't get me going, and I'll see you guys next time.